Hello, I am Connor Sullivan, and this is the construction of the St. Peter's Basilica. In this slideshow presentation, I will be teaching and going over everything from the pillars on the outside to the artworks on the ceiling. We will see the many people that designed it and how it came to be the wonder that it is today. The St. Peter's Basilica was constructed during the Renaissance, which was a period of European history that was marking the transition from the Middle Ages to modernity and covering the 5th and 6th centuries. It was characterized by an effort to revive and surpass the ideas and achievements of classical antiquity in the times before. The modern build of the basilica was instructed by Pope Julius II. The St. Peter's Basilica was built in the Vatican City, which is a small country in the middle of Italy. It is actually the smallest country in the world, and it only stretches across 109 acres and has a extremely small population of around 825 people today. And one of those people is actually the Pope. So why was it built here? It was actually built here because this is thought to be the apostles' gravesite. And this is supposedly where St. Peter was buried. And St. Peter was one of the 12 disciples. He was actually crucified head down on Vatican Hill, that is in Vatican City, Italy. And the St. Peter's Basilica is also where the popes are buried, and currently there are 91 popes buried in, and because they ran out of room under the basilica. So there are actually many architects that put their work in towards creating the basilica, which is the largest dome in the world and a place worth honoring St. Peter and grand enough for the Pope to come for his final rest. All of these architects seem to be like a puzzle piece where they fit together and create a bigger, more beautiful picture. There were a few main architects to the basilica. The main architects were Donato Bramante, Michelangelo, Carlo Maderno, and Gian Lorenzo Bernini. All of them put a lasting impact on the building of the St. Peter's Basilica and an impact on the Renaissance altogether. Donato Bramante served as the principal planner for Pope Julius II's comprehensive project for rebuilding the city. And the St. Peter's Basilica, of which he was chief architect, was begun in 1506. Bramante's lasting contribution to what would become St. Peter's Basilica was the 4 giant pillars and their arches that you can see there in the front. As it turned out, his original designs were changed, but the central cross of what Bramante had envisioned as a Greek cross plan remained. He is considered to be one of the fathers of the Baroque style of architecture, which is what the basilica is considered to be. So it was actually Pope Paul III that appointed Michelangelo as the chief architect of the sprawling St. Peter's Basilica, which is the opulent centerpiece of the Vatican where the popes lay to rest. St. Peter's dome was designed by Michelangelo. Michelangelo began the dome project at the age of 72. The most important theme that he tried to get across was the simplicity and the divinity of St. Peter and the presence of light. The dome is covered all around in mosaics, and a mosaic is an artwork depicted by small tiles to create like a beautiful shimmering image. And one of Michelangelo's most famous sculptures is actually in the building, which is this picture you see right here in the middle. That picture is called the Pieta, and it depicts Jesus after his crucifixion with the Virgin Mary holding his body and mourning over it. The Pieta was installed in the St. Peter's Basilica and remains there to this day. Another main architect of the Basilica was Carlo Maderno, and this was his first major Roman commission, and he actually designed the facade of Santa Suzanne, which led to his appointment to be the chief architect for the St. Peter's Basilica. In 1607, he designed the nave and the new facade for St. Peter's, and was made an architect to Pope Paul V. And the word facade originally comes from the Italian word facciata, and is defined as the outer or all external faces of a building, and the nave is the central part of a church that stretches to the main entrance, which you can see in the top picture. And the nave is actually 90 meters long, 26 meters wide, and 44.5 meters high. The next major architect of the Basilica is Gian Lorenzo Bernini, and he designed the baldachin, which is actually right here at the center of the crossing in the church, and is directly underneath the dome of the Basilica. He designed it out of bronze, and it's intended to mark in a extremely monumental way the place of St. Peter's tomb that is directly underneath. Under its canopy is the high altar of the Basilica, which he is also credited for creating the Baroque style of architecture, so he's another father of the style. So there are actually many other architects that contributed to the creation of the St. Peter's Basilica. Although some were more lasting or more impressionable, they were all important, and they all led to it being how it is today. So after Bramante died, Raphael actually took over as chief architect for the St. Peter's Basilica for a short amount of time. Raphael made many substantial changes to Bramante's original plan, and the floor plan for the St. Peter's Basilica was actually projected by Raphael. He envisioned a wide space with a nave of 5 bays and included rows of complex apsidal chapels off the aisles and on either side. He also planned to reduce the size of the towers and to encircle each semicircle apse with an ambulatory, which is you'd see the seats across the hall. Next is Antonio de Sangalo the Younger. So he actually maintained a positive relationship with the popes, and he was actually constantly involved with the designing and building process of the basilica from 1513 until around 1536. He was kind of the guy that was in charge of the day-to-day construction. The next is Giovanni Giocondo, and his work actually helped introduce the Italian Renaissance to the French for their architectural styles. So he returned to Italy. He was assistant and aided in the construction, not for long, but just for a few years. So from 1564, Giacomo Barozzi da Vignola carried on Michelangelo's work at St. Peter's Basilica, and he actually constructed the two subordinate domes that were according to Michelangelo's plans. Barozzi actually died in Rome in 1573, not being able to finish the basilica. So, after Vignola died, from 1573, Giacomo della Porta was in charge of the ongoing construction of the St. Peter's Basilica, and later, in collaboration with Domenico Fontana, completed Michelangelo's dome between 1588 and 1590. Della Porta gave a higher, more pointed profile than Michelangelo had intended for the dome, but he did follow his plans. Bernardo Rossellino worked for Pope Nicholas V, who employed him a couple years later, or for a couple years, and he actually designed the apse for Pope Pius II, and he actually worked on the old St. Peter's Church, which got tore down and rebuilt into the St. Peter's Basilica. And although his work got torn down and moved, it was still a part of the journey, and it was one of the best places to start. Carlo Fontana actually made a calculation overviewing the entire construction and the whole expense of the St. Peter's Basilica from the beginning in 1694. It actually amounted to about 46,800,052 crowns, and he didn't include models in this. Each crown is equal to about a quarter of a pound, and every pound is about $1.2, and that means that the 46,800,052 crowns is roughly equivalent to about $15 million today. So I thought that was a very interesting fact. So after Raphael died in 1520, backtrack. So Giuliano da Sangallo, who was actually close to the Medici family, who brought him to Rome under Pope Nicholas V to help renovate the old St. Peter's Church. And again, it got tore down, but led to a great starting place for the basilica. Baldassare Peruzzi actually took place after Raphael died in 1520, and he succeeded him as architect of the St. Peter's Basilica. And he actually started using drawing as a tool that you could understand and further develop an existing plan. Domenico Fontana was actually the person who worked with Della Porta on the completion of the St. Peter's Dome from 1588 to 1590 that was based off of Michelangelo's model. So Antonio da Sangallo the Elder actually, throughout his career, he worked on the St. Peter's Basilica. First as Bramante's assistant, and in 1520 as a chief architect. But he also created this wooden model of St. Peter's Basilica, and it was commissioned by Pope Paul III, and this actually still stands in the Vatican Museum, so you could visit this today. And it blows me away, and I would love to visit it. So these are actually some of the blueprints of the St. Peter's Basilica, and they were written and changed many, many times by most of these people that I just mentioned. But for the most part, they were finalized by Michelangelo by 1564. The basilica is actually built out of travertine stone and measures about 136 meters or 448 feet tall, 220 meters or 750 feet in length, 150 meters or 500 feet in width, and it covers an area of more than 5 acres. And the St. Peter's Basilica is actually approached by the St. Peter's Square, which is a forecourt encircled by a Doric colonnade derived from Greek architecture. So closely, if you look, you'll see that there are pictures, pillars, you have draping fabric, but this is the Baroque style architecture, which is closely associated with the 17th century. Baroque architecture was characterized by vaulted cupolas like a dome-like ceiling that you can see in this picture. And it's held up by swiveling columns. There's none in this picture, but you've seen them. Walls and doorways made of both rough stones and smooth stucco. And interior design denoted by luxuriant fabrics and furniture. The biggest, most breathtaking thing about all of St. Peter's Basilica has to be this beautiful dome. And it is actually the largest dome ceiling in the world. And the interior is actually filled with fancy mosaics that seem to shine in the light. The great dome soars above the altar of baldacchino and sumptuously embellished with mosaic and stucco ornaments. It is supported by 4 structural piers with a perimeter of 71 meters and a height of 120. And it was designed by Michelangelo as his final project, and sadly, he died before it could be completed. The interior of St. Peter's Basilica is filled with many masterpieces of the Renaissance and so many beautiful Baroque art. And among the most famous of which is Michelangelo's Pieta. And there's also the baldachin by Bernini over the main altar, which you can see in this picture. And there's a statue of Longinus in the Crossing, the tomb of Urban VIII, and a bronze cathedral of St. Peter in the Apse. So mosaics actually first appeared in the Vatican at the end of the 6th century. Pope Gregory had become enamored with the art form and wanted to adorn the interiors of the St. Peter's Basilica with all of these glittering artworks. So he went around and he recruited all the mosaic artists from Venice that he could find to fill it. And that is how we got what we did today. And inside the basilica, there are many, many statues and many famous works, like the Pieta, which is a famous Renaissance sculpture that's attributed to Michelangelo, created between the years of 1499 and 1500. Housed in the basilica, the sculpture is a beautifully detailed representation of the Virgin Mary mourning over the body of Jesus Christ. There is also the baldacchino, a massive bronze structure designed by Bernini and completed in 1633. It's located just in front of the papal altar and was commissioned by Pope Urban. as a grandiose way to celebrate the basilica's completion. And there are many other statues designated to popes and actually to St. Peter himself. So the exterior of the basilica consists of rows of columns, and it's entered by a place called St. Peter's Square, which you can see here. So these rows of pillars are described as an enormous oval framed by two colonnades of 284 columns and 88 pillars in 4 rows that stand 43 feet tall. And these pillars, to me, are like the motherly arms of the church that reach out with the way that that reach out and seem to be welcoming and seem to be embracing a hug. And the most impressive part of the square, besides its size and its 284 columns and 88 pillars that flank the square, it's above the columns there are 140 statues of saints created in 1670 by the disciples of Bernini. The statues above the columns represent saints and popes, with those at the top of the facade. This oversees the entire view of the square. In front of the dome, it represents Jesus, all of his 12 disciples, and St. John the Baptist. As you can see right here, they're all labeled up top. And this is my favorite piece out of the entire thing.